My name is Allie Marie Brown. I'm 26 years old and living in the countryside of New England. I'm an artist and herbalist, and right now, year by year, I'm learning how to homestead and become more self-reliant. You see, I love challenges and pushing the limits because within those moments, I feel the most alive. So in 2023, my partner and I took on a deserted A-frame with the goal of renovating the entire property inside and out, all by ourselves, transforming it into our dream home. One of our main goals was food production on site, so despite being in the midst of so many projects, we made it a priority to at least have a solid garden where the journey of vegetable growing could begin, and that year was a huge success. Now this year, I've expanded in a few ways to boost our yields and eat the majority of our meals from the garden. And section by section, we get a little closer to that long-term target, and the slow but steady growth gives us time to observe, adapt, and learn. So I want to tell you all about the lessons I've gained along the way and how I've done what I have so far in regards to growing my own food. This is the product of years of gardens in different locations and microclimates with various setups that have led me to the knowledge and experience that I will now share with you. So all of that said, that takes us up to the present moment here, though I do want to jump back just a couple of months so I can take you through the whole growing season, tips, tricks I've learned along the way. Been growing and gardening for 4 or 5 years now and really honing in and taking it seriously the past 2 or 3. So I myself still have a lifetime of experience and knowledge to gain. This will just be the culmination of what I have found works here so far. You could argue that the growing season kind of starts as soon as the last one ends with things like cleanup, planting, garlic, for example, that you want to sit over the winter and get established. Where it really begins to pick up for me would be April or May, depending on the weather. This is where I'm going to tackle anything I didn't get to in the fall, remove any root systems from annual plants that are no longer going to be growing, that are maybe taking up some space, blocking where new roots could be. When it comes to things like the foliage, little leaf bits from last year that are left behind or have fallen off of trees, I kind of like to start with more of a clean slate, but it is good to let some of that work its way back into the soil, decompose. This is where you may start to consider things like amending your soil, but since the garden here was built just last year and filled with a really great mix, I'm not going to be doing too much work on that, though I do like to add a little bit of compost every year. And what that's going to do beyond improving the soil nutrients is boosting the water retention and also helping the soil structure. This season I did expand outside of the fenced-in main garden, and that required a lot more work. The soil here is very dusty when it's dry, but dense and clay-like when it's wet. It's tough to work with, it's loaded with roots, so I had to go in and break it up and kind of start from scratch, scoop out some of the soil, add in things like compost, a little bit of peat moss. You can also add things like vermiculite to boost retention or perlite to boost drainage. Both are going to factor into aeration. And that's what I like to use to get a solid base, good foundation started. From there, you might look into, does what you're growing prefer a more acidic soil or a more basic soil? For acidic soil, you could add things like pine needles or grass clippings. sulfur, whereas basic wood ash is really good. Lime. What's going to make that process easier for you is to get a soil tester so there's no guessing. I just have a really simple one here. I'm not even sure what brand it is, but it does test the pH, it tests the temperature, it tells you if your soil is dry or wet. All you do is remove the cap there and pop it into the soil. You get an instant reading. Pretty neat, helps a lot. So I've cleaned up, I've tested my soil for the pH, made amendments where I need to. Now comes a floater step, I would kind of think of it as, because it happens a lot during the winter but really comes into play after I've done what I just talked about, and that's planning. This is a crucial part, especially if you want to be maximizing your growing capacity, having things thrive and flourish. You really want to make sure that there's a lot of thought and intention going into your beds or into the ground where you're growing. And for that, there are two things I consider heavily: sunlight and companion planting. I do feel very fortunate and grateful that here at the A-frame in the fenced-in garden, the main garden, it receives a ton of sunlight, goes over, hits it all day long, but if I'm the garden, the sun is slightly behind me in the sky, so I'm not going to want to plant things that are tall, like corn in the front, because they could potentially cast shadows onto the other plants, and that might lead to stunting their growth. They might not get the same amount of sunlight that they would otherwise, so I'm going to be putting the corn the furthest away. Yeah, things like tomatoes get tall, beans and peas will get tall if you have trellises. For companion planting, you'll be able to find everything you need online if that's what you're into, but I have a book that I got when I started out. It's called Raised Bed Gardening for Beginners, and this came with a plant friends and foe section here. This is very fascinating information. Just give you a couple examples. Peas and beans are not chemically compatible together, so if you plant them together they could have an off taste. Whole beans and beets stunt each other's growth. You might get potato blight if you plant cucumbers with potatoes. And then whereas on the flip side, things like lettuce and carrots together, lettuce has shallow roots, carrot has deep roots, so they're not competing for the same space. You might be familiar with the three sisters, beans, corns, and squash. They all thrive together, they're very synergistic. Corn becomes this natural support for the beans to climb up. The beans put nitrogen into the soil and help feed the corn. And then squash has large leaves to block weeds. With organic gardening, you know, things are always going to be trying to eat your veggies, and certain plants paired together will help repel the pests that may want to eat that specific plant. Last year I planted a ton of marigold to help out on that front. This brings me to crop rotation. You really don't want to be planting the same thing in the same space year after year. Switching things around helps play into keeping the fertility of the soil good and well. Certain plants are going to deplete your soil of certain nutrients, where others will replenish that, so keeping that in mind is important. Keep a journal of what you planted where, or document it, take some photos or videos. And then just keep in mind how big things are going to get. They always, of course, start so small, especially if you're going from seed. It's hard to fathom what the plant will grow into. Just keep track of what the expected size is. Usually if you're doing it from seed packet, it'll tell you the spacing. You want to find that balance where you're not leaving too much room open where weeds will just come in because it's sparse, but you don't want to overcrowd and make it so your plants don't get to their full potential. And this is where you're going to dive into either building or gathering supplies for things like tomatoes. They love their cages to grow up with. Trellises for things like beans and peas and cucumbers. Some people grow pumpkins or watermelon or squash up archways or trellises too. That takes us to planting. Such an exciting time of the season, getting things into the soil, whether you're transplanting or sowing the seeds directly. I like to do this in the morning or evening when the sun is not too intense and provide ample amounts of water during this process as well. This is going to help with things like germination or with the roots from the transplants getting established into the soil. And then when it comes to general watering, it really depends on the weather of that season. I've had seasons where I minimally water because the rain was sufficient enough, but there are years where it's more drought-like and you'll have to water very frequently, potentially every day. And to gauge your soil, you could use that soil tester if it has the ability to test the dryness level like mine, or just simply take your finger and stick it into the soil. And if it's dry on the top and even an inch down, then you'll start wanting to water and keep things good. But don't overwater, because root rot is a nasty thing that you don't want to deal with. It's hard to bounce back from that. Just like with planting, I water in the early morning or the late afternoon, sunrise, sunset time. This prevents any leaf burn if there's too much water left on the leaves, and then the sunlight is harsh midday. You want to avoid that. And getting out there first thing in the morning, connecting with the plants and watering them is really special. The garden is something that needs regular care and attention. It's all about the reciprocity. What you put into it is what you will get out of it. In regards to things like pests, one of the things I have started doing this year that has been an absolute game changer, I'm not really sure why I didn't do it in the past. Maybe I was overwhelmed or didn't think of it, but adding nets has been a critical prevention technique so that my leafy greens are not getting eaten to smithereens. The other vegetables I'm growing don't encounter nearly the same amount of trouble as those. I got a customizable kit. I can expand it if I have to, and it is quite effective. Truly, it is. The thing is, if the pests are not enough, there are animals that are also going to want to eat your vegetables. Here, I don't really deal with rodents, but we've got raccoons, there's bears quite often here, deer almost every single day, and I'm able to avoid them interfering with what I'm growing simply through noisemakers that are solar powered. They will emit a high frequency. Many let you choose. Some have higher volume alarms that go off. It really just kind of comes down to your preference. Yeah, the install was super easy. Just these little stakes that go into the ground, and nothing is eating anything right now. In the past, I tried coyote urine, and I didn't love it because as soon as it starts raining, it kind of washes it away, and it also smells awful, and it can draw coyotes to your property. So I don't really know about that. Even just the fence around the main garden has provided enough protection, and then the noisemakers are that extra level for the things that aren't in the fence. If you are using a fence, I always say when you install where your fence, the perimeter is going to be, dig into the ground a bit, up to 6 inches, a foot, and install that fence down into there, and then that way you have a protection underground level, which is going to deter digging rodents from entering. Also with your fence, the gaps in the fence itself, you don't want to be big enough for rodents to get into. So with my garden specifically, on the bottom section, we also layered a couple rounds of boards so there's no holes at all. And something else that's fun to experiment with is adding in beneficial insects. So ladybugs are actually a predator to aphids. A single ladybug can eat up to 50 aphids in one day. So back at the off-grid cabin, that was one of the tactics that I used in that garden. And then after some time, your vegetables will start growing. There's things you can do along the way to assist them in that process. And I'd like to take you out into the garden so I can show you more of a specific one-by-one example. But before that, there is more of a universal technique that I've learned that can apply to a multitude of the different vegetables you might be cultivating, and that is pollinator brushes. Even in my garden, which has butterflies, hummingbirds, bees, all sorts of pollinators, sometimes I still find that they might miss some flowers, maybe the yield isn't as high as I expected it to be. So I have a set of mini paintbrushes, and you do want to use different ones. For example, things like squash and cucumbers, you don't want to accidentally cross-pollinate. There's things like toxic squash syndrome that are not great. So I do have different brushes for each set of vegetables, I suppose you could say. And what I'll do is simply dip the brush into one flower and then into the next. You do need to be aware of what the plant's male versus female flowers look like to ensure you're doing everything correctly. And yeah, this isn't really always a necessary thing to do, just something to boost your yield. Like I said, if there's a lack of pollinators in your area, or maybe you're just not quite producing what you thought you would and you have the flower capacity or availability to be producing more. The thing with beans, with peas, beets, carrots, radishes, start them from seed. They don't love being transplanted and they're very simple to germinate and get going on your own. And that being said, another thing for the peas and beans specifically is once they start producing, make sure you're getting out there and enjoying them and picking them. It's going to encourage them to keep producing more and more. And if you're not picking them, not only will they not produce as much, the beans and the peas are going to get really huge, and sometimes they don't taste as good when they get like that. Sometimes they'll get discolored too. So behind me now is the pepper bed. Everything is super abundant. And the thing with peppers is if you want them to produce a lot, you can't give too much nitrogen in the soil. If there's too much nitrogen in your soil, which could just be the case, or if you've fertilized in the wrong way, then they're going to produce more leaves and not focus on the vegetables themselves. So in this bed here, I've got a bunch of varieties of tomatoes. I've got tulsi, basil, and also tomatillos, but I'll start with the tomatoes. So tomatoes grow things called suckers, and they're not going to produce any fruit, but they will take energy from the plant, and that is energy that could be going to producing more big juicy tomatoes. So what I like to do is go in with my thumb and pointer finger, and I'll take my fingernails and simply snip them right off. And I'll just go out once a week and see if I missed any on the plants. Once you see one for the first time, you'll realize they're pretty simple to identify. Then I've got basil and tulsi here. Tulsi is also known as holy basil. It's a type of basil. And then I also have Thai basil, purple basil, over in the corner. And what you want to do is just take off the flowers on tulsi, and also where the flowers are starting to develop on the very tippy tops of the basil. And again, that's just going to encourage more growth so that it's not focusing just on the flowers. And tulsi flower tea is a very delicious medicinal tea that you can make. So it's a win-win really. So just keep an eye on that too. That way the plant is continuing to grow instead of focusing on flowers and seeds. Here's the corner with the tomatillos. They are the coolest. The way that they grow is so fun and fascinating, but don't pick them too early. Wait until they are completely filling up the casing and starting to crack open the bottom of the casing here before you harvest them. So in this bed, one of the things I want to talk about first is the beets. Now these are farther along than what I'm going to say, but I did just do a bunch of staggered harvests. Now with beets, carrots, radish, you're going to start by sprinkling your row of seeds. Don't be too worried about it or anxious with the spacing. Just go ahead and make sure there's an abundance of seeds, so you will definitely get sprouts. Wait till they get to be about an inch tall and are a little more established, and then thin them to the proper spacing. And with things like beets and radish, I love to save the sprouts that I pick when I'm thinning and put them on avocado toast or in a salad. They're fresh, they're nutritious, and they're delicious. And then these beautiful pink and yellow and green rainbows in the back are Swiss chard. Do not pull the whole thing up. Just pick the leaves off that you want for each meal, and it will grow all season long. Things like cabbage, broccoli, kale, other leafy greens are going to be susceptible to a lot of pests. So I really recommend figuring out a good net system, especially when you're organic gardening. Also things I've heard people use like diatomaceous earth or spraying cayenne on some of the different plants, like mixing cayenne pepper and water together and misting that on. There's a lot of different preventative methods to stop the bugs from eating everything, but above all, I'm telling you, get the net. I also have carrots that are developed and I'm picking them regularly now, right directly behind me. I wanted to say something about carrots too, same with beets and even potatoes, things that are focusing on in-the-ground growth and expanding in the soil. Make sure you don't have too compact or clay-like of soil. You need something nice and loamy. Loamy soil is when you squeeze it and it's able to get a little bit firm, but also when you release your hand, it'll start to break apart again. Something really nice about growing broccoli is that it doesn't have to be a one and done harvest. I have pulled heads off of this broccoli several times and it's still producing heads. And yes, they might be smaller, but they'll be producing more and it adds up. So when I go ahead and remove that first really big head, I try not to take the whole plant out, but rather give it time to see what more it can bring to the table. So yes, I will take you through the whole garden, give you a proper tour, but right now, like I said, we're just bouncing around doing the tips and tricks to help you grow things the best you can. One of those things is kale, also under this net. Looks like a purple palm tree right now. Most of the kale you're growing, and there are a lot of varieties, will start to look like a palm tree by the end of the season, because what you do is pick the bottom leaves as you need them and keep the whole plant in the ground, sort of like, or really exactly like with Swiss chard. And kale is one of the first things I'm able to harvest all the way through the season until the end. It's one of the last I'm harvesting. It's very hearty. I love it fresh in a massaged kale salad, but also really good sauteed or as kale chips or in quiche. Definitely keep this one under a net. Even at this point in the season, I've ripped the net a little bit and I should have patched it. A couple of bugs have gotten in. You really want to try to keep them out the best you can. Along this wall here, I've got a couple different kinds of cucumbers. Cucumbers like to be watered very consistently. I mean, a lot of vegetables do, but the thing about cucumbers is that if it gets drought-like and then there's a ton of water, it's really random, you're not keeping up with it, your cucumbers can get very bitter. I actually had it happen to me not long ago, and that is going to cause digestive upset. Just don't even eat it if you taste it. This is a good cucumber. And then lastly for now, because I've got to get the cats inside, it's almost sundown, one more thing about tomato plants is they're going to be indeterminate or determinate, and that's going to affect how they grow. Especially the indeterminate ones you want to keep your eye on because they are going to grow. They always exceed my expectations. This year they're starting to flop over because I didn't provide them enough cage. I'm going to have to build onto it. They need that sturdy vertical support system to help them with aeration. It's going to help them produce the most amount of healthy fruit. And fun fact, if you did not know, tomatoes actually are a fruit. Alright, so that just about sums it up for plant by plant specific tips and tricks that I've learned over the years to grow more and more food every single season. Even right now, Kyle and I are eating almost every single meal vegetable wise out of this garden, and it doesn't just have to be salads, it can be sweet, savory, spicy, salty, acidic, syrups, oils. We're doing it all right from our own yard. There's infinite recipes, especially when you're cultivating things like herbs and flowers alongside the vegetables and fruits and berries, and there's no feeling like it. And if you're not even able to keep up with what you're growing, then you can preserve it, you can can it, jam it, the list goes on and on. It's really exciting, that direct connection between what you're able to put into the garden and what you're able to get out of it. You can provide for yourself, for your family, for your friends, and get closer and closer to self-reliance if that's what you're into. But even just the act of gardening is so rewarding in itself in so many meaningful ways. Every day in the garden is different, so I did set up and film one day of just a very average day mid-season to show you what that could look like. I'm not sure how long I have until the thunderstorm and maybe rainstorm starts, but I've already got, this is a purple Cherokee tomato, and then a tomatillo that I'm going to be putting in pots. The thing is, I've got a really prolific tomatillo, though I found out it needed another one to cross-pollinate, produce fruit. This one will go in the pot right next to the other. I already got the soil wet, so all I have to do is pop these in, get the cages on them, put them inside, and then I can do the other things I want to do. New tomatillo here, older tomatillo behind me, flowering like crazy. Now the bees and the other pollinators will do their thing. Next task, the potatoes are at a point where they need to be what's referred to as mounded up or hilled up, and what that is just getting more soil around the plant, because that's going to increase the yield, because it's going to encourage more tuber production. Also, the thing is that if the tubers start getting exposed to sunlight, they're going to get chlorophyll production and solanine. That would make the potato green and bitter, and that's not good to eat. It can be toxic in large quantities, so we want to avoid that. A couple times a season, get some more soil on there. I'm out of breath. Woo! Just like this. Usually I like to use a local soil or the coast of Maine soil. This is what I've got today though. Still organic. Oops. Kind of dumping in sections that don't have much going on, and then I'm going to spread it all out as opposed to trying to spread the heavy bag on each one individually. I'll tell you, the end of the season is so fun. It's like a treasure hunt, digging through here, finding where the potatoes are. I love it. I'm gonna get one more bag for this side. I gotta get in here, but I don't want to squish the onion. This is the bed, one of the beds that I'm doing staggered harvests in. So this row here, I just collected a ton of radish, and now it's been bare and weeds are taking its place. So I'm going to clean it up. The thing is, around, this is bad, I can't remember if this is zucchini or summer squash, but around that section of the bed there's a ton of what looks like weeds. It's actually tulsi. It's an amazing herb and I love it in tea. So I don't want to just rip them out. That feels really wasteful. What I'd really like to do is transplant them into a little tulsi patch in the yard. I'm not sure when that's going to be a reality though. So for now, I'll get the actual weeds out and plant probably beets. I've got a couple beets here. I have carrots over there, so out of what I've got in here, maybe I'll do some carrots and some beets. And maybe even some radish too. I'll just do a little bit of everything. That's pretty much it for today. With the garden, it's about, I think, doing a little bit every day, staying on top of things. That's what makes it feel manageable and productive. Maybe one day you're weeding. Every day when it gets to this point, you're usually coming out and harvesting a little bit of something. You might be deadheading or a little bit of watering, depending on what the needs are for the day. Today, removing weeds and planting seeds, mounding the potatoes, adding a couple more plants. And I also think in doing it in little chunks like this, it also helps it remain this very fun, meditative practice as opposed to a chore you have to do really. Even though I call it chores, it's really enjoyable. And it's the process overall of gardening, the hard work that gives you the fruits of your labor in the end. I was kind of rushing today because of the weather, but I got it done and the thunder's picking up a little bit now. I think we're going to get rain within the hour. What do you think, Harper? What is it? tonight we got in a box of HelloFresh. Right now I'm focusing on cultivating vegetables, berries, but I don't have animals at this point for eggs or milk or meat, so until we get to that point where we're completely self-reliant, I still do need some help along the way. Sometimes we find ourselves in the position where we're not sure what to eat for dinner, what to make. Maybe we've harvested all that there was to get out of the garden for the day and eaten it already, or we're in a time crunch, and that's where HelloFresh is the perfect solution. So I'm really excited to say that they are the sponsor of this video. So not only is HelloFresh America's #1 choice for home cooking, but they also just doubled the size of their menu to offer over 100 recipes each week. They've now got bigger portions, double the amount of healthy options compared to before, and over 15 high-protein recipes every week, so you and your family can stick to your health goals. And if you're someone who feels like there's just not enough time at the end of the day to cook an entire dinner, HelloFresh actually has over 10 ready-made meals per week that are ready in just 3 minutes. And on top of that, they've got dozens that only take about 15 to 20 minutes to make too. Every meal that I've tried from them has been simple to follow and delicious. Right now, you can take advantage of the new HelloFresh. All you have to do is use my code AllieFM at HelloFresh.com. You're going to get 10 free meals and free breakfast for life. You're going to get 1 free meal per box with an active subscription. Free meals will be applied as a discount on your first box for new or returning subscribers. It varies by your plan. So go ahead and sign up today. You can click the link below or use my code AllieFM at HelloFresh.com. One more thing in the realm of tips and tricks that I found to be very useful for this season and all the seasons to come has been my washing station that is outside. You really don't want soil going down your drain, and it might just be a little bit, but if you're putting a little bit down it every day washing off your plants, it can add up. Also, it can make a mess of your kitchen, and it's just nice to get it done before you have to bring it in. So I assembled it. You could build it however you'd like, as long as you're able to wash and the water's going through some sort of mesh, or even some people do install full sinks outside that just drain into a bucket or the soil. Really whatever you want to do. Mine's very simple. I can add on to it in time or make another down the road, but I do highly recommend assembling, building, or buying one. A great addition to gardening is crafting your own blend of compost. So last year I built a 3-bay system. You want to keep it 3 parts brown, 1 part green, so I needed things like wood chips and leaves, and then started adding in garden and kitchen scraps, some composted manure and comfrey leaves to get things rolling, and a couple of worms even to help break things down. Now that we're also working on the forest portion of the land more and cleanup, we're able to generate a much higher amount of wood chips if I do need to adjust the ratios, but other than that, I turn the pile regularly, letting the entire thing get hot. And you also want to make sure that it stays damp. I am on year 2 now with this bay, and by next year I'll be ready to use it and start blending in the 2nd bay, using some of the first to get that mix jump started. And as we move closer to a homestead and farm setup, the piles will be able to build much faster. So right here we have the front and the entrance to the garden, and there's 2 beds on the outside that I've loaded with culinary herbs and tea herbs. Since they're pretty deer resistant, nothing has touched them, and then I save more space for the vegetables inside of the garden. Some things you'll find in there include rosemary, different types of sage, lemon balm, oregano, thyme, sweetgrass, feverfew, chives, lemon verbena, chamomile, and a couple of flowers that I snuck in there too. Yellow variations, also lavender. And the 3 buckets on each side here are filled with raspberries from one of my friends. We're going to be starting a berry patch. We found a wild berry patch over on the hillside, so these are going to get added to that. So here we are inside of the fenced portion of the garden, and this has to be my favorite time of day to be in here. The sun has just come up, so things are soft and golden. Everything's waking up for the day. If you look around the garden, you're likely to find different bees asleep on and inside of flowers. It's really beautiful. And so I think for this tour, what I'll do is start in the back, head towards the front, and then show you the medicinal herb garden from this year, the pea tunnel, and we can talk about the garlic bed that I just harvested. So in the pots to the side of me, I've got mint. You don't want to put mint into your regular beds because they are prolific growers. They will take over, so I like to keep them contained. And right now I've got pineapple mint, peppermint, mojito mint, and spearmint. And then behind me is a little bit messy right now. I have since lifted the net off of this section because the bok choy and lettuce they've come and gone, and we've eaten them and enjoyed them. And now it's a bunch of beans that are crawling all over the place. I have gotten hundreds and hundreds of beans this year, so we've eaten them fresh. I started pickling them. Oh, I missed this one. This one's gotten really big. Usually I pick them when they're a little bit smaller, but they do get very long. They're rattlesnake pole beans, and they've got really nice purple stripes throughout them. In this far corner, this bed has artichoke, which is something I've never grown before. I've got that in a pot over there as well. Like I had talked about when I showed you a typical day in the garden, I did do staggered harvests in here. So I have pulled up things like carrots, beets, radishes. I've got a couple beets that are closing in on getting ready to be harvested here. And then the back side is corn. That's ready to be harvested. We've been pulling a couple ears a day, grilling it. And it does look super lush because I put, like I said with the three sisters, I did the beans with the corn, so they've crawled up each of the corn stalks. I've got a lot of baby carrots that are growing in here right now. And then behind me, I've got chives, 2 chive plants here that are about to flower. And then behind it is summer squash. And I haven't moved the tulsi yet. It hasn't really impeded any growth like I thought it might on the summer squash. So it's kind of been fine where it is, and it'll keep reseeding itself, so next year will be my tulsi outside of the garden year, I think. Then there are red onions along the back side as well, and the final thing would be an eggplant variation in the corner. Though I will say I think I just found some volunteer strawberries, which is awesome. We'll take it. Directly across from the last bed in the other back corner, we have probably our most sparse bed right now because, again, I'm in between staggered harvests, getting a lot of sweet onion out of here right now, and I do want to try to grow probably 10 times this amount eventually so that we're set for the year. But for now, we've been really happy with this. I've got beets in here for staggered harvest since we are going to start pulling the onions slowly. I did have celery in here, but it was getting too much sun and rotted and melted into the bed, and I got that out of here. Really thick, beautiful, healthy Swiss chard. And then in the back, all in here, we had lettuce, different romaine varieties, spinach. We were eating every single day a garden fresh salad at the beginning of the season, and so that's why it's a little bit empty in here right now. But this is definitely the thickest Swiss chard I've ever grown. You just keep on picking and it keeps giving. Okay, and then zigzagging across, here is the tomato bed. I've got a handful of varieties, maybe up to 10 varieties of tomatoes growing in here, and tomatillos this year, which are starting to put out their little, I call them lanterns because I think that's what they look like, or tents. And we're getting closer and closer on those. A couple purple Cherokees starting to form on this one. And then right here, I did pull up some garlic already. Now I've got things like nasturtium, more tulsi, regular basil, sweet basil. Tucked way in the nooks and crannies here, I've got some parsley and even horseradish. Also a purple basil variation. A lot of these tomatoes are starting to get red. I'm loaded up with Romas, I've got sun golds, all sorts of delicious, juicy tomatoes that I'm using for salsas, sauces, caprese. So I feel really grateful for the amount of tomatoes that are ripening right now and will continue to do so throughout the season. Also, little bits of chamomile throughout here. The chamomile plant from last year self-seeded, and it's just continuing to sprout more and more and more. Across from the tomatoes and all of that is the bed that is typically sitting and growing under a net, but I've removed it so I can show you what's going on under here. In the front here, there are 3 purple cabbages growing. Along the middle is some kale. The whole front is carrots. A lot of them are ready to be harvested. We've been taking 1 or 2 a day depending on what we need. Got some cauliflower that we just harvested yesterday, some broccoli that's on its second wave, and some newer broccoli that I put in. This bed here won't take too long to explain. This is the pepper bed, and it is jam-packed with peppers right now. We've got bell peppers, shishito peppers, banana peppers, jalapenos, a very large variety of different hot peppers, some that are too spicy for me, but Kyle loves that. And right now is the time where you can come out and grab basketfuls of peppers every single day. So we'll be topping them as a garnish on a lot of meals, or putting them into salsas, pickling the peppers. Lots of things you can do with them. So this potted plant here is goji berries, which really are a superfood with the amount of vitamins and just nutrients that they have. They're a very beautiful hue of like a reddish pink, and you can dry them. I love putting them on smoothie bowls, and though we didn't get any berries this year, since it's our first year with the plant, I'm hoping to transfer it into the ground soon and get it established in a more permanent spot. Maybe next year we'll get some. It is getting hot. Today is going to be full sun, high 80s, typical August weather for around here. But we are on our last bed for inside the fenced garden for now. And that is the potato bed, which is just loaded with different types of potatoes. I've got a gold variety and then Adirondack blues. And along the back, which is now lost in all of the different leaves going on, I have some trellises set up where I planted maybe 20-25 more of the rattlesnake pole beans. So like I said, we've been getting really a lot of those every day. These are getting closer. Once they're all withered up and no more real vitality to them anymore, then I'll go digging for the potatoes. The pot over there has another variety of eggplant. These are long, slender ones. We've been liking those chopped up into little pucks and then sauteing them. It's delicious. Other things growing in the garden, we've got some flowers for fun on the hanging baskets. And I do have 2 more standing beds now that I think of it. There's these 6 main beds on the ground, but there are 2 beds that are tucked behind all of the tomatoes and corn. So let me take you outside of the garden so you can get a better view of them, and I'll give you a look at what's going on. In these 2 side beds, cucumbers, we've got maybe 4 or 5 different kinds growing in here, and then a couple peppers in each bed. But being able to come out in the morning, one of my favorite things to do if we have a ripe cucumber, which is most days in August, is just enjoy it whole. So on the back side of the garden is where I have my entire medicinal herb garden for right now. It's loaded with things like echinacea, anise hyssop, borage, chamomile, calendula, comfrey, lobelia, citronella, lamb's ear, lemon verbena, lemon balm, marshmallow, yarrow, chickweed, arnica. Have a lot of Japanese knotweed on the property that we're dealing with little bits at a time. So my goal for next year is to also tackle this section of the garden, kind of just round the corner and continue this stone wall. Wow, that's loud. Anyways, what I was going to say is that underneath this section of knotweed, I do have a strawberry patch going. It was really fruitful this year, and I hope it will just keep growing next year. The birds didn't bother it at all. Yeah, I do hope that a lot of it comes back as long as the roots got established well and I can keep it safe from any really aggressive snowstorms or frost. And we'll talk more about this, but I do have plans to expand everything here. This is the pea tunnel that started a couple of months ago as just a continuation of the hill on this part of the property. I had been to farms where you could pick your own peas, and they had these long stretches of fence with the tallest peas I had ever seen, just a complete abundance. You could pick as many as you want, and there was always a surplus. And I wanted to bring a mini version of that to our house, to our property, so that we could enjoy the same feeling, eat the fresh peas. Has been a learning curve. The knotweed over here cut back a little too late, so this farthest side didn't get as much sunlight, so we weren't able to get all of the peas yet, but they're still growing to go all the way to the top on this side. And then Kyle added cucamelons, which I had never heard of before. They're these little cucumbers that look like watermelons, and they grow like crazy. So we have one of those at each corner, and we're able to come out every day and grab handfuls of those. And the other areas of the yard that are actively growing food, or were at least for the season, include a garlic bed by our stone wall that I just harvested, and now all of the cloves are drying. They're in storage. We'll be able to eat them throughout the season ahead and save cloves for planting in the fall. And then when we bought the A-frame, it came with apple trees in the yard. Some had been knocked over, but we do still have one standing, and it produces the most delicious apples. We eat them fresh, we put them in cobbler, and we even make sourdough apple pie. So here we are back in my apothecary inside of the A-frame. This is where I'm able to produce all of the different items for my small business. If you'd like to check it out, I always put the link in the description of my videos. I just wanted to chat a little bit about goals for the future and what we hope to turn this place into when it comes to more of the food production side of things. I talk about this a lot, but right now we're kind of doing a very small version of what we hope to do in the next 5 or so years. We've got over 20 acres here. Most of it is wooded forests, and we do hope to clear maybe an acre or two and be able to have fields for farming for ourselves so we can become more self-reliant. Essentially grow what I'm growing inside of the garden now, but at a much larger scale, so that hopefully we get to a point where maybe we don't even have to go to a grocery store. And that brings me to this idea that has been floating around, that what if we were able to build something here, maybe a one-story building, but it's got the basement, and it would be our own grocery store where we can keep everything, store it properly, have the root cellar as the basement. Also going to be building a small greenhouse in the next year or so, with the long-term goal on that being that we'll invest into having a year-round humidity, temperature controlled space, so we can really, in New England where we get all 4 seasons and many of the months are cold, we can grow fresh food all year round. On more of the animal side of things, we do want chickens. We want to be able to have our own eggs. Sometimes the A-frame, the work, the renovations inside of here take longer than we think they will, and sometimes we aren't able to hit our goals as fast as we would like to, but that still is very much one of our goals. Right now I have my fingers crossed for next year being our chicken year. We want cows and sheep and goats and so on and so forth. Maybe for meat in the future, but right now for more of eggs and milk, and with things like sheep, being able to have our own wool. Honeybees, definitely making that a priority for next year. That was something I really had intended to do this year. It didn't quite get around to, but next year I'm doing it. Back to that idea of having some fields out there. We do want to have an orchard. Anything that can grow in our zone, I want to grow. We can grow things like peaches and pears and cherries, not just apples, but I will have a lot more apple trees. Definitely bigger berry patches. Yeah, I feel as though Kyle and I are very much in the infancy of our journey here at the A-frame, and it'll take years, but this place is going to get more beautiful and fruitful as time passes. We definitely want to keep creating a very magical, special place here. And so once we do get the house complete, we can move more onto the outside things that we want to work on. Yeah, we're both very grateful, very passionate about this project, and determined. It's really awesome to have a partner who's so aligned with me on our future goals. And if you'd like to see this journey unfold chapter by chapter, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. It's a blend of DIY, plant knowledge, self-reliance, the countryside, scenery, nature, reconnecting with the earth. And with that said, I really hope that this video has helped or inspired you, and I'd love to hear about your journeys in the comments below.